Good afternoon. Welcome. You made it to the right place once again. We are back for our Region 10 Learning Collaborative web session today. You guessed it. It's me, Allison Ave-Sacra. I'm here to chat with you today about benefits, kind of part 2. We appreciate you making the time to join us. This is going to be our last big topic push before the end of the series. It's hard to believe. It feels like we've been doing this a long time and also a short time. But we've had just 30 minutes together in odd weeks over the last few months, and we're happy to be covering benefits now. A couple of you got to meet Suzanne at the Northwest Regional Primary Care Association conference in Alaska a couple of weeks ago now. So it was great to put some faces to names and meet you. And if we didn't get to meet you, then we're sorry we missed you, and we hope that we'll have the chance again. But today we're going to be talking about total compensation. We know it's something that you guys care a lot about, you have a lot of thoughts and feelings on, you have a lot of experience with, and also something we've been talking about in different pieces for the last few weeks. We did the regional webinar where we talked about kind of salary and benefits. Suzanne was on and discussed salary and really communications about what you're doing with benefits at our last web session. And so now we really want to talk about benefits packages themselves and really what's the point of them and how you can fix them. There are probably a billion ideas that you could have, and we're going to hope that you all will share this session and next session when we're really in our chatting office hour time. But we want to make sure you get the really core message that we hope you will take with you off into the future, no matter where your benefits packages go, which is that it's really just about your story. And you want to constantly be asking yourself, how does your benefits package tell your story, and how do the specific elements that you select paint the picture of that story that you're trying to pick? So I'm sharing it once again, one of my favorite portraits, or one of my favorite paintings, which is Luncheon of the Boating Party, because I feel like it's just one painting, but it tells so many stories and so many different people's faces. And I think that's really what a lot of benefits packages are about. Benefits can be really tricky, obviously, because everybody wants different stuff, and your goal is to kind of keep everyone. But I think the idea really, in order to be successful long term, especially in this very volatile market, is to figure out what kind of story are you telling, and how do all the different people that maybe are in your painting have their own thing, but they're part of that larger story. And so benefits in general, there are many, many components that you could have. We had some good things on the discussion board last week, which I want to mention. There are so many things that can be part of your benefits package. We mentioned insurance and holidays and retirement and education, and some of the things that we think about when we're making an offer to somebody to say, hey, please come work here, don't work somewhere else. But we really want to make sure that you have kind of a benefits structure that can grow and change with time, but that always has some core elements to it, no matter kind of where you are or how much money you have to put towards these things, or what's going on in your area. So that structure is really got these core components. Finances is one, work-life balance is another, and development is the third. So we're going to do kind of deep dives on each of those in our time here today. Some of this stuff will get a little mixed up with culture, which is good. It's supposed to. So work-life balance is a great example of things that sometimes we think about as the culture of your organization. That's all good. And another reason to use your story to make sure everything is aligned. So it doesn't have to be clean-cut, only benefits, and no culture pieces, but just thinking in general about all the things that you do and what can you pack into this structure. While it's true that everybody wants something different, we find in general, and the research finds in general, that most people want something in each of these three buckets of stuff. And their desire, some people want a lot more about finances when it comes to their job. Some people are a lot more about development. That has to do with their age, their experience, their interest, their passion for the specific work they're doing, all kinds of elements. But we think if you have something in each of these buckets and figure out how to personalize and how these pieces are part of your larger story, then you really can't go wrong, and you can sort of personalize away. So finances is our first big piece, and there are a couple of questions I want to ask you, and just think to yourself. There's no official polling. Of course, you can chat to us anytime, but think to yourself, one, how does working for your organization help people reach their financial goals? And two, how do the financial benefits that you offer align with your mission and your story as an organization? Remember that building a benefits package is about creating and designing incentives that attract the right type of people to your specific organization. We can't all do all the things, but theoretically, you want to be able to answer these questions in a good, positive, thoughtful way. Our organization helps people reach their financial goals, and I know that because XYZ. And I know that our financial benefits align with our mission and our story because XYZ. So there are a couple of things I want to highlight, and I mentioned these in the regional webinar, but I want to kind of talk through them specifically here. Three big things that we think can make the most impact and that we've heard health centers have a lot of real interest here. I'm going to start with healthcare costs. So obviously, we're health centers. We're all about, access to high-quality care for all people. But oftentimes, we run into health centers that have less than ideal health insurance plans for their own staff. So an example is, health centers that have very high deductible insurance plans for their health insurance. And so a $1,500 deductible, and then they offer incentives, and, if you participate in their wellness program, you get a certain amount of money, but then their own staff are left with these really high healthcare burdens. That would be a great example of your benefits package not necessarily aligning with your finances. Or aligning with your mission. Another piece of that is like maybe your organization covers a lot for the employee, but not necessarily for any dependents. So this is fine in theory, but you want to make sure that you have a real clear articulation for why that might be. You're advocating for health care, affordable health care, but then your own employees can't afford to pay for their own children's health care costs, for example. So hopefully this doesn't apply to any of you, but I want to flag it because I think it's one of the things that we run into most often that feels like the biggest violation of the kind of promise that you're making to staff by working for you, but then having this benefit not align with what you think the mission of your work is. So thinking about that piece, what are the plans you offer? What are the services that are covered? Another great example here is behavioral health care. So thinking briefly about your own staff and the behavioral health services available to them through their insurance plans and through, let's say, nearby services. How does what you preach align with what you practice? I know, for example, that we're all struggling with behavioral health recruitment and retention and getting all different kinds of those providers. So if you're in a more isolated area and you're struggling just to find behavioral health practitioners for your patients, what kind of access to behavioral health do your own staff have, and how are you going to manage that once maybe you get somebody in and your own staff want to see their colleague? So thinking about that, healthcare costs, how does working at your organization help people manage their health care costs and get to their goals? Another example is financial planning, and this is one I love because it's relatively low cost as you go along, but the idea really being kind of what are you doing to help improve financial literacy and help people manage the money and the salary and the benefits they do have to their maximum value. So this is an example of you can't necessarily offer tons more money, But what you can do is say, look how much you can do with your money, and we're going to invest in somebody who can provide you services here. Lots of folks do this. Retirement plans, for example, will do financial planning as part of their package with you for hosting their retirement account. So there's lots of ways you may already have access to these services that are not an additional cost, but you should consider offering to all staff. Definitely for your clinician staff, because oftentimes they have, of course, high loan burdens from their training and education, and of course, you want to make that total compensation sell for people to say, hey, yeah, you can't get the salary, but you'll get the loan repayment, and see how all of that goes as far. That's a very effective strategy for clinicians, but also for everybody else. And then once you do that, you can also get some sense of, is what you're paying even reasonable? Once you have somebody financially planning for folks, they say, oh, I'm not really sure how these people are going to make this work. That's another great way to get more information about how you want to build the plan. And the last big one I wanted to mention was housing assistance. I think this is one that's always existed in certain markets. I'll mention San Francisco because you all can guess that's a big problem. But this is popping up kind of all over the place. And it's really understanding housing is the thing that, everybody needs housing. It doesn't matter who they are, what their job is, or what their situation is. So what are any barriers that your staff are facing to getting affordable and safe housing? And then from there, you want to figure out, okay, what can you fix? Is there something that your organization needs to be involved in the community to solve a crisis you might be having with housing? Or how can you kind of, I won't say cover it, but mitigate the damages in your benefits package? So again, a lot of the lessons learned we have are from health centers in places like San Francisco, but also in Colorado, we have examples of health centers that have said, okay, we've got to invest in short-term housing for new staff into our organization, at least at a certain, quote-unquote level, or discipline, or we need to figure out how we're going to work with a real estate agent to help people manage the market, which can get really competitive, or we're going to host seminars on how to buy a house for first-time home buyers at our organization that both patients and staff can attend. There's a lot of pieces here that you really want to think about. This housing issue is going to really affect their bottom line, and your ability to help them manage that financial element of their life is going to make you more attractive. We also have a comment here from Brad Guthrie, which is a great one, which is that child care is a big issue in most areas, not just affordable, but care in general. Amen to that, Brad. And we'd love if anybody has some good child care solutions that they've done. If you want to pop that into the chat, we'd love to hear about that. We're hearing a lot more that folks are doing things like at the very base level sick care. So if an employee's child is sick, they can bring their child into this sick care place and they can continue to work and don't have to call out that day. But that's not really a long-term child care solution. Figuring out what kind of incentives, what kind of structures, what kind of partnerships you can pull up with others is a big example of how working at your organization would help them with their overall financial life. Right. So if you have any of those examples on healthcare or financial planning or housing or child care, please drop them in the chat. But for now, we want to do a super quick poll just to see where you're at as we're preparing ideas for next time session, and also just to do a quick self-assessment for you. So choose the sentence that best describes your current financial benefits. A, our benefits are pretty standard. B, our benefits go above and beyond, but really only for providers. Or C, our benefits help all staff achieve their financial goals. Obviously, we hope everyone's going to get to C, but again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So choose the one that feels most relevant to you right now, just as a quick self-assessment. And we're going to give you just 2 more seconds, and then we're going to ask Chris to close the poll and give us the results.
Okie dokie. Closing the poll. And for A, our benefits are standard. We have 30%. For B, we have 10%. And for C, we have 10%.
Great. Thanks, Chris, and thanks to everyone for participating. I think not a super big surprise, but good to have you participate, and we'll look forward to hearing from those who said C, maybe in the chat box here or on the discussion board later, because we'd like to know what are some of the things that you're doing to really align things. Okay, so that's finances. I hope you get the basic gist, and we dug into that in a little more detail just to really paint the picture for you about how you want to use those guiding questions to think about your own benefits package. The second section, or bucket of stuff, is work-life balance. It's probably the one you hear most. This is the one that gets brought up the most when we're talking about generational differences between staff. But the questions here, very similar. How does working for your organization help people live whole lives, not just be kind of a number in the gears of your machinery there? And then how do the work benefits align with your mission and story? So a couple of things we wanted to do a deep dive here on are obviously paid time off, both the amount of it and the structure available. Lots of questions here. There's absolutely no one right way to do it, but some folks have like one big PTO bucket, and both their sick and their health time gets rolled into this. Some people have separate sick and health time, and then there's lots of questions about how people are able to access it, how much time in advance notice they have to give, what percentage of times do they request that they're denied or that they're given the things, you know, all of the elements of that people say, oh, it's easy enough here. And that's really what you want. There's no golden standard of this amount of time and they have to give this amount of days notice or whatever. But if you were polling around, you basically want the answer, you want people to answer the question pretty similarly of, is it relatively easy to get the time off that you need to do your life? Right, and you hope that's easy, and that is going to look different places. But think about that question, and that's the most basic element of the work-life balance. We also wanted to highlight flexible work options. So obviously, part-time options are available or not available depending on the specific job folks are doing. One big push we're seeing, not really in the private sector right now, but definitely in health centers and nonprofits, is job sharing. That's basically when two people share one job. It can be a little tricky to think about it part-time versus job share. The basic idea is two people share one specific role, meaning they have the same caseload that they have to work on, for example, but then they each work different shifts to cover the FTE that you need. This is just one example of many of how people are managing kind of flexible work options. We hear a lot of people have success for people who have 4 days a week and 10-hour days. Obviously, this has a lot to do with what kind of call coverage you have and what services you're required to give to your patients. But there are those elements that are kind of hanging around. We think it's best to really be thinking about this and stay up to date on the research on flex options, especially as we're all thinking about, okay, what is the future of healthcare? Can we imagine a time where an in-office visit is not 100% of the healthcare that we're doing? And if so, what kinds of flexibility could we or should we offer to our staff? And kind of where's the future going? So keeping up with right now, especially for people who are more experienced and need to take time off to do research or tend to an ailing parent or, you know, do whatever it is they need to do, how do you keep them as long as possible? And then the last one is really connection to community. This is another example of the solution that doesn't have to be really expensive, but it's thinking about how are you constantly doing that messaging and reconnecting people back to what's reasonable and what's going on in their communities. So is it opportunities for community service? Is it like regular interaction with patient stories? Is it understanding local impact by engaging with business leaders? You know, whatever it is, helping people understand that their work can be part of their life balance and reconnecting them with that mission all the time through benefits that off the top may seem like, oh, this is just general cultural fluff type stuff, but are really about saying, see how your work is improving your own community, and see how being part of that work all the time can help you bring some balance and some joy in your world. So there's lots more stuff there, but thinking through the work-life balance is really pretty important, and being able to constantly communicate this bucket of activities is really where you're going to get the most sort of relative bang for your buck there. So we're going to do one more poll. You're going to see a theme. This is the types of polls we're doing today. I want you to think about your work-life balance stuff, whatever it may be, all those benefits, and vote in this poll here and say either A, our benefits are pretty standard, nothing special that I think to mention. B, our benefits package has some extras focused on staff health. Maybe you have a wellness program or something, or you have flexible schedules. Or C, our benefits help all staff live whole lives. Again, we want you to get to C, but okay if you're not there, just something for you to think about. So I'm going to give you just a few more seconds before we close out the poll. I hope you're going to take these slides later. We're going to put them in the discussion board and really go back and kind of discuss these with your team. But for now, I'll ask Chris to close the poll and read out the results.
Okay, closing the poll. It's pausing for a second to close. I can see at this point 10% for A, 30% for B, and 20% for C.
Great, thank you. I see we're getting a few more ticks up to C as we go. Again, work-life balance is one of those things that's really tied to a lot of the cultural pieces that you think of, your organizational culture. So not surprised a lot more of you are at the B trending towards C level, but we hope that you'll all continue kind of that journey. Okay, last big bucket of stuff is development. So your questions here, again, the same. So think to yourself the answers to these. One, how does working for your organization help people achieve their career goals? And two, how do the development benefits align with your mission and story? You know, I want to mention here, we've talked earlier in this series about metrics, and retention was one of those tenure metrics. I think it's a good plan for you at the organizational level to think about what good retention is. People can't stay forever. They're just not going to do that. So what does good retention look like for you? And what do you consider as part of your story and mission, knowing that you can't keep people forever, to help them continue to develop into professionals that are working in our space and are going to continue along with the general mission we all have of increasing access to health care. And so this is a good check-in moment for your story and thinking about what you actually offer as both formal and informal, and things that maybe you have that aren't explicitly labeled in your benefits structure that sometimes make it, again, they live kind of in the organization, but you don't explicitly name them in your benefits when you're talking with people. So the few things we wanted to highlight here are time and resources for training. That's probably the thing that is the trickiest to sort out, but can really make the most impact. How are you giving all staff, not just clinicians, but all staff, both time and money for training within their job scope? So any certifications they need to keep up or anything like that. Lots of people are paying for that out of their own pocket if they're not physicians. And so what does that mean? How is working for your organization helping them or not helping them stay current in their job? And then, of course, time is the big one. So how is your organization how is your organization accounting for and planning for the ability to give folks training, again, on their job? It's not like any old thing, but the things that they need to be successful, even if it's something like conflict resolution, how are you making space for that? And this can feel the trickiest because it feels a little bit like an add-on, or you're worried about how are people going to take time away from patient care? These are all totally reasonable concerns, but you do need to have an answer for this. And this is probably the number one thing we hear that staff want And the number one thing that tends to get saved just for clinicians as part of their packages but not part of the overall culture. I think that's kind of changing now, but we want you to really be thinking about that, and that can be really high impact. Another piece is career planning, something that some folks do a little more manager by manager, or it's not labeled in their benefits packaging, but help people really come up with career development plans, figure out where they are, where they want to be, either in job title or skill level, and then helping them think through that piece. We don't naturally have people that we can bounce things like that off of and demonstrate that other people who will demonstrate care and concern about where we're going to end up in our jobs and in our overall career trajectories. Along with that is mentorship. Again, this takes some time. A lot of these development pieces are about time, but it's really showing that you're investing in your staff and you care about the fact that they're doing a good job. And so mentorship is a little less about like somebody who's buddy-buddy and a little more about somebody who can help you with your professional judgment or understand what training you might need to do or understand areas for your own career growth. So figuring out how you're building relationships and connections within the organization. So again, when people come to work for you, they say, I want to stay here because staying here is helping me advance in my career in the way that I want. And even if I know I want to become something else or do a different job, I know I want to stay in this area and stay connected to this organization. So I want you to think about kind of what you have right now. We're going to have this last poll before we wrap up to think about your development benefits, so benefits that are really focused on, that career development and personal development for your staff. And again, our options are A, our benefits are pretty standard. If we have anything, it's not really formally listed as an official benefit. Or B, our benefits help with maintenance of things. So that would be an example would be certifications, maybe for all staff or just providers. It doesn't matter. Maybe you have something there. Or C, of course, we want you all to eventually be is our benefits help all staff achieve their career goals. So think about it. It's not a legally binding vote, but check in with yourself and with your gut, put your vote in, and then we're going to have Chris close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And as that flips over, he can read us our results. Maybe it's taking a little time to close out.
Sorry about that. It freezes when I close the poll, and I should have opened.
No worries.
Sorry about that. I was stuck.
No worries.
So A is 0%, B is 40%, and C is 20%.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, everyone, for participating in those polls. Great that a lot of people everybody is at least at the B level, which is great, and I think that continuing education training piece is a big part of it. So continue to think about how not only can you push it there, but how what you're doing in that bucket is really aligned with your story. So we're going to have a moment for questions. You can type them in the chat box if you have anything immediate. But I want you to think about for next week, we're going to have more chatting, discussion time about this in our office hour. But before we get to that, I want you to spend a little bit of time, again, this is not legally binding, but just to write down your story and think about what story is it that you want to tell with your benefits package. So, and then you're going to grab and locate any of your comp materials, your benefits package, any marketing that you have, and then we're going to kind of go through it next week. Some examples that we have from folks are, our organization is about continuous learning across the whole organization. So some key benefits they have that sort of tell that story, they do loan repayment for a number of disciplines. They have flexible hours while you're in training. Let's say you go back to school or something. And then 3, they do formal career planning. So that's an example of how the benefits package tells that first story. Another example is, our organization is about the whole health of our community. So for them, that means benefits on financial planning, it means they have a wellness program, and it means they offer job training for people from their community who want to become part of the workforce at their organization. So think about what your story looks like. You can have 3 sentences, one for development, work-life balance, and finances. You can have 1 sentence. Think about it, write down your story, and then collect that collateral you have on your benefits package. And we're going to dig through it together next week and kind of get you thinking about ways that either you could add things, change things, or start to communicate more clearly with your teams about the benefits you have and why they would want to stay with you. So seeing no questions and seeing as we're at time and I have to close up, I am going to close up. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We really appreciate you making the time, and we're going to chat with you next week at our office hour.